The night the Reiner family was brutally murdered, the world seemed to pause. A serene Brentwood evening shattered in seconds, leaving a luxurious mansion drenched in blood and questions that no one could immediately answer. Rob Reiner, 78, a man known to many as a pillar of his community, and Michelle, 70, his life partner and confidant, were found stabbed to death in their $13.5 million estate. But this wasn't just another tragic headline. There was something more, something hidden, something buried beneath the very foundations of their home that would leave even the most seasoned investigators stunned. What could possibly be lying beneath the manicured lawns, behind the walls, under the very ground they walked on every day? And why would anyone go to such lengths to hide it? That's exactly what the FBI discovered, and the revelations that followed were nothing short of shocking. It's a story that combines family tragedy, hidden secrets, and a mystery that may rewrite what we thought we knew about the Reiner estate and the people who lived there. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's start at the beginning. The Reiner family was the picture of old money prestige. Brentwood, Los Angeles, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, where privacy is priceless and appearances are everything. On the surface, Rob and Michelle appeared to live the life many dream about, an elegant estate, financial security, and a family that seemed functional. But beneath that veneer, cracks were forming. Nick Reiner, their 32-year-old son, lived in the guest house on the property. On that fateful Sunday, something snapped. The details are chilling, even now. Police reports later revealed the horrifying scene. Both Rob and Michelle had been stabbed multiple times. The nature of the attack suggested not just rage, but something deeply personal. The son, Nick, was arrested that very night and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The question that haunted everyone was why. Why would a son commit such an unspeakable act against the very people who brought him into the world? And what role, if any, did the hidden items beneath the mansion play in this devastating event? When the FBI was called in, investigators expected to deal with the aftermath of a domestic crime. What they did not anticipate was what lay hidden below the estate. A collection of items buried so meticulously, it was clear someone intended for them never to be discovered. These weren't ordinary possessions. They included personal objects that hinted at connections to a long-forgotten case, unusual artifacts whose origin and purpose immediately raised questions, and evidence of a secret location designed to store things far from prying eyes. Imagine, for a moment, walking across a perfectly manicured lawn, thinking everything is as it seems. Beneath your feet, decades of secrets lie in wait, untouched. What stories could these objects tell if they could speak? And what truths might they reveal about a family whose life seemed so ordinary until the tragedy occurred? The FBI's discovery suggested a narrative far more complex than a single night of violence. There were threads reaching into the past, threads connecting hidden truths to unresolved cases, threads that may explain more about the Reiner family than anyone ever knew. But this isn't just about mystery or intrigue. It's about human nature. Our capacity for secrecy, deception, and sometimes betrayal. It's about the dangerous allure of hiding the truth, of believing that what is buried can never be found. And yet, in this case, the earth itself could not keep secrets forever. The FBI's work would uncover things that even seasoned investigators found difficult to explain. Objects that seemed out of place, messages encoded in the very way things were hidden, and connections that suggested premeditation, calculation, and perhaps even obsession. The story becomes even stranger when you consider the artifacts themselves. Some items were clearly personal, linked to people who may no longer be alive or present in the public record. Others were mysterious, their purpose undecipherable at first glance. Some seemed almost ritualistic, though whether they were symbolic, practical, or part of some hidden plan is unclear. Every object raised more questions than it answered, and as investigators dug deeper, the estate seemed to reveal layers of secrets, each more astonishing than the last. The Reiner family murders dominated headlines for weeks, but beneath the sensational reporting was a quiet, growing fascination with what the FBI had uncovered. Every new detail released to the public hinted at a story far more complex than anyone had imagined. Why were these items hidden? Were they evidence of past crimes? Were they personal keepsakes? Or was someone trying to erase traces of history from the world? And most importantly, did these buried secrets have anything to do with the murders themselves? It's worth pausing to consider the implications. If these objects were connected to unresolved cases or missing persons, the Reiner estate might be a key piece of a much larger puzzle. The FBI, trained to see beyond the obvious, immediately recognized that these discoveries could not be dismissed. Each artifact, each carefully concealed item, carried with it the potential to answer questions that had remained unsolved for decades. And yet, the deeper the investigators dug, the more they realized that the story wasn't just about objects. It was about people, motives, and secrets that someone wanted to remain hidden at all costs. Here's where the intrigue deepens. Some of the items appeared to have been buried for decades, meticulously hidden in a manner suggesting intention and forethought. This wasn't the random hoarding of a family with eccentric habits. No, this was deliberate. Someone had made sure these objects would remain out of sight, inaccessible, unknown. And now, the FBI had uncovered them, peeling back layers of history that the family had tried to keep buried. As we move into the heart of this story, it's important to keep one thing in mind. What you think you know about this family, about the Reiners, may be far from the truth. Every revelation that follows challenges assumptions, upends expectations, and forces a re-examination of events that, at first glance, seemed straightforward. This is a story of tragedy, yes, but it is also a story of secrets, obsession, and the lengths to which humans will go to control what others can see, know, or discover. So why does this matter now? Because the FBI's discovery beneath the Reiner mansion is not just historical. It has immediate consequences. It could redefine ongoing investigations, implicate individuals not yet publicly associated with the case, and provide crucial answers to questions no one has dared to ask. And for you, the audience, it offers a rare glimpse into a world where wealth, tragedy, and hidden truths collide. A world most people only see in fiction, but in this case, it is chillingly real. The night of the murders began like any other in Brentwood, calm, quiet, almost deceptively ordinary. Streetlights glowed softly on pristine sidewalks. Neighbors locked their doors, children were tucked into bed, and the Reiner estate, perched behind tall gates and lush landscaping, seemed as secure as ever. But inside, a storm of violence was about to erupt. What unfolded that night would shock an entire community, leave the police scrambling for answers, and trigger an FBI investigation that would uncover secrets no one ever expected. Rob Reiner and Michelle were found brutally stabbed in their mansion, their lives extinguished in a way that suggested rage, calculation, and personal vendetta. At first glance, it seemed almost impossible to reconcile the horror with the family's outward appearance. Here were people who were known, respected, even admired in their social circles. Their estate was a symbol of affluence, their lives meticulously curated to reflect calm, success, and stability. And yet, in a single night, everything collapsed. The first officers on the scene described a house eerily silent except for the faint echo of a life abruptly halted. The doors showed no signs of forced entry. The security system had been disarmed. Someone with knowledge of the house's inner workings had been inside. And then they saw the bodies. Rob, a man known for his sharp mind and meticulous habits, lay slumped near the living room, his life stolen in a flurry of violent strikes. Michelle, equally composed in life, had fought, but ultimately succumbed to the same violent fate. The crime scene was harrowing. Blood spattered across walls and furniture, overturned objects hinting at a struggle. The police took in every detail, the placement of bodies, the pattern of wounds, the evidence of defensive action. They knew immediately that this was not a random attack. It was intimate, deeply personal, and it required someone who had access and knowledge of the home. Someone close. And then there was Nick Reiner. The 32-year-old son, living in the guest house on the property, became the center of the investigation almost immediately. The guest house, only steps from the main residence, allowed him proximity that no outsider could have. Nick had lived there quietly, almost invisibly, yet the tragedy suggested his presence couldn't be overlooked. Witnesses reported seeing him earlier that evening, moving about the property in a way that, at the time, seemed unremarkable. But the timeline would later make chilling sense. Nick's arrest that very night shocked the neighborhood. The son of the victims, taken into custody under suspicion of murdering his own parents. The first question on everyone's mind: why? What could drive a son to commit such an act? Was it rage, mental instability, financial motive, or something else entirely? In the hours and days following, police struggled to piece together a motive, knowing that each answer would be as complex as the crime itself. But even as investigators focused on Nick, the FBI had begun to notice something unusual. The Reiner estate was more than a scene of domestic violence. There were signs, subtle at first, that suggested someone had been hiding something: objects, artifacts, personal items, all buried beneath the surface. The implications were staggering. If the FBI's suspicions were correct, the murders were only part of the story. Beneath the ground, literally, lay pieces of a puzzle that could reveal long-forgotten secrets, unresolved investigations, and perhaps motives that no one had yet considered. As details emerged, the media descended like vultures. Headlines screamed of the shocking murders, the high-profile family, and the bizarre circumstances surrounding the arrest. But while the world focused on the immediate tragedy, investigators were uncovering layers of complexity that made the case far stranger than any news report could convey. The Reiner estate, a symbol of wealth and normalcy, was in fact a repository of hidden truths. Each item discovered beneath the surface hinted at stories long buried. Stories that might explain not only the murders, but also the obscure and unexplained threads connected to the family's past. Neighbors spoke of the Reiners with reverence and unease. Some described them as warm, approachable, even generous. Others hinted at tension, whispers of disagreements, and secrets kept behind closed doors. What's undeniable is that this crime had shattered the illusion of normalcy. It was a reminder that no amount of privilege or success could insulate a family from tragedy, especially when secrets festered beneath the surface. The timeline of events that night was painstakingly reconstructed. Police examined phone records, security footage, and witness statements. They noted every step Nick had taken, every interaction, every potential confrontation. It was meticulous work because every detail mattered. A single misstep in understanding the sequence of events could obscure the truth. And truth, as the FBI would soon realize, was layered, some of it visible, some of it buried beneath concrete and earth, hidden deliberately for reasons that would soon become apparent. Investigators also began to notice the calculated nature of the murders. The precision, the control, the knowledge required to commit the acts without immediate detection. It all suggested a mind operating with clear intent. There were no random attacks, no chaotic bursts of anger unrestrained by logic. This was deliberate, organized, and chillingly personal. It raised the question: what had driven this level of premeditation? And could it be connected to the hidden objects beneath the mansion? Indeed, the FBI's early work at the scene hinted at something far beyond a family dispute gone tragically wrong. They noted irregularities, signs of unusual activity in the landscaping, subtle disturbances in areas that seemed mundane. And when they began to investigate beneath the surface, literally, they made discoveries that would change the trajectory of the case. Objects were buried deliberately. They were placed in ways that suggested intention. Carefully arranged, protected from the elements, and hidden from casual observation. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure these items would never be found. The implications of these discoveries were immediate and profound. First, the presence of these buried objects suggested forethought and secrecy on a level that went beyond a simple domestic conflict. Second, the nature of the objects themselves hinted at connections to other mysteries. Missing persons, unsolved cases, and artifacts whose significance was not immediately clear. Third, these hidden items raised questions about the family's history and relationships. What had they known? What had they done? And what secrets might they have taken to the grave? For the local community, these revelations were unsettling. The Reiner estate had always been a place of privacy, protected by gates, security systems, and careful discretion. Yet, even in such a controlled environment, secrets can fester. The murders were tragic in their immediate consequences, but the FBI's findings suggested that they were only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the veneer of a high-profile family tragedy lay something deeper, something that could alter public perception and raise uncomfortable questions about trust, loyalty, and the lengths people will go to hide the truth. Even more chilling was the psychological implication. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of safety. But in the case of the Reiners, the home itself had become a vault, concealing mysteries that could reshape understanding of the family's dynamics. It was as if the house held its own secrets, quietly awaiting discovery. And now, with the FBI's involvement, those secrets were finally beginning to surface, layer by layer. By the end of that first night, the police and FBI had established the basics. A brutal double homicide, a prime suspect in the son, and the initial signs of something buried and hidden on the estate. But as dawn approached, investigators realized they were standing at the threshold of a much larger story. This was no ordinary family tragedy. It was a narrative woven with secrecy, hidden objects, and questions that demanded answers. And the night's events were only the beginning. What had begun as a shocking act of violence now had the potential to uncover truths that could span decades. The estate, once a symbol of security and privilege, was revealing itself as a repository of secrets. Each discovery pointed to a level of premeditation and concealment that raised as many questions as it answered. Who had buried these items? Why? And how, if at all, did they connect to the horrific murders? As the day unfolded, the world watched with fascination. News outlets reported the crime, neighbors whispered about the family, and social media erupted with speculation. But beneath the public eye, investigators were preparing to dig deeper, literally. The buried objects represented a puzzle, a secret history that no one had anticipated. And while the initial focus was on the murder, it was becoming increasingly clear that solving the case would require understanding the hidden layers of the estate. The moment the FBI stepped onto the Reiner estate, the atmosphere shifted. Police officers had done their initial work, cordoning off the crime scene, cataloging evidence, and piecing together the immediate events of that horrifying night. But the FBI doesn't just investigate crimes. They uncover patterns, motives, and secrets that others often overlook. And at the Reiner mansion, the agents quickly realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a domestic homicide. The first step was methodical. The FBI team examined the layout of the estate. The mansion was massive, its rooms meticulously maintained, security cameras strategically placed, and grounds landscaped to perfection. Every inch seemed designed to convey control, order, and safety. But beneath that perfection, the agents sensed irregularities. Slight depressions in the soil, unusual markings along the foundation, and subtle inconsistencies in the landscaping hinted at alterations, modifications, or hidden spaces. For seasoned investigators, these details screamed. Someone had something to hide. Agent in charge, a veteran with decades of experience in high-profile cases, noted something immediately. The scene is tidy for a murder of this scale. But tidy doesn't mean normal. There's a pattern here. Someone wanted this contained, controlled, and yes, hidden. That observation would later prove prophetic. The FBI's work was not just about cataloging the evidence of the murders, but uncovering the story that had been buried, both figuratively and literally, for years. The team began a systematic sweep of the estate. Cameras, drones, and ground-penetrating radar were brought in. Every inch of the property was scanned for anomalies. And that's when the first surprises appeared. Beneath the lush gardens and ornamental trees, there were disturbances in the soil inconsistent with normal landscaping. Areas that should have been solid were hollowed out. Subtle indentations, barely noticeable to the casual observer, indicated the presence of buried objects. It wasn't just random debris or old construction remnants. The items appeared deliberately concealed. The FBI noted patterns that suggested careful planning. Trenches dug and refilled, concrete slabs subtly altered, and even the placement of ornamental objects seemingly designed to camouflage the entrance points. Whoever had buried these items had knowledge of the estate, access, and the foresight to ensure their discoveries would be delayed, perhaps indefinitely. Inside the mansion, the FBI's attention shifted to the rooms adjacent to the crime scene. They examined the furniture, flooring, walls, and hidden compartments. Hidden compartments aren't uncommon in affluent homes. Safes, false panels, and concealed drawers are part of the world of luxury security. But what agents found here was unusual. Evidence of long-term concealment, objects that appeared to have been placed carefully and purposefully, untouched for years. Some had been wrapped in protective coverings. Others were preserved in ways that suggested significance far beyond monetary value. The items discovered were strange, varied, and tantalizingly mysterious. Personal objects that could belong to people no longer in the house. Artifacts that seemed oddly out of place for a modern Brentwood mansion. Documents with cryptic markings, photographs with faces no one recognized. Even the forensic experts were taken aback. When they examined some of the buried artifacts, they noted traces of chemical treatments meant to preserve them, techniques rarely used outside of specialized archival or archaeological contexts. This was not a random act. This was deliberate, precise, and careful. Someone had intended for these items to survive, hidden from sight, for as long as possible. And that raised a disturbing question. Why hide them at all? As the FBI dug deeper, they uncovered objects that hinted at connections far beyond the immediate family. Some items appeared linked to unresolved investigations, missing persons, or long-forgotten crimes. It was as if the estate held a repository of secrets not just for the Reiners, but potentially for others. Each artifact, each buried item, became a puzzle piece in a larger picture, a picture that no one could fully comprehend yet. The discovery of these items also introduced the possibility that the murders were not entirely spontaneous. Could someone have been trying to prevent certain information from surfacing? Was the act of violence connected to the buried artifacts, or was it coincidental? These were questions the FBI had to consider, because the presence of deliberately concealed items at a murder scene is never just a curiosity. It is evidence. Evidence of planning, knowledge, and intent. Throughout the investigation, the FBI was keenly aware of the psychological aspect. The very act of burying items beneath one's home is a statement, a desire for control, secrecy, and dominance over information. It reflects a mindset that values concealment above transparency. And in the context of the Reiner murders, it suggested that the estate itself held keys to understanding motives, relationships, and possibly even hidden alliances or conflicts. The agents interviewed neighbors, staff, and anyone with access to the estate. They asked questions about the family's history, relationships, and behaviors. Patterns emerged. There were hints of tension, whispers of disagreements, and subtle signs that the family's outward image may have concealed inner turmoil. The FBI combined these human insights with the physical evidence to form a multidimensional understanding of the estate. Not just as a home, but as a site of secrets, careful concealment, and potentially dangerous knowledge. Then came the most surprising discovery. Beneath a section of the garden adjacent to the main house, the FBI uncovered a small, carefully concealed chamber. It was shallow, only large enough to store several boxes and objects, yet it was built with precision. Reinforced walls, protective lining, and a lid disguised as part of the landscaping. Inside were artifacts that had been deliberately preserved, documents, photographs, small personal items, and objects whose origins were immediately mysterious. One investigator described the find as breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. The significance was immediate. Someone had hidden these items for a reason, and that reason could be central to understanding the murders, the family's history, or even unresolved criminal investigations. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was evidence with the potential to rewrite the narrative surrounding the Reiner family and their tragic end. And yet, even with the initial discoveries, the FBI knew they were only scratching the surface. The hidden chamber was just one part of a larger network of concealment. Ground-penetrating radar suggested additional hidden spaces, some deeper, others cleverly masked beneath concrete or stone. Each discovery raised more questions. Who created these spaces? When? And for what purpose? The sense of scale and intentionality was staggering. By this point, it was clear that the Reiner estate was more than a crime scene. It was a labyrinth of secrets, deliberately constructed to hide items of unknown significance. Each step the FBI took uncovered new layers of mystery. Objects, symbols, traces of long-forgotten events, and potential connections to crimes far beyond the Reiner family. The investigators were no longer just trying to solve a murder. They were unraveling a hidden history, piecing together a narrative that had been deliberately obscured for decades. As the day wore on, the investigation intensified. Specialists in forensics, history, and even archaeology were brought in. Techniques typically used in historical digs were applied to the mansion's gardens and foundations. Every tool, every method was employed to ensure that nothing remained hidden. And as the layers were peeled back, the team began to understand the true depth of the estate's secrets. For the outside world, the FBI's presence added a layer of intrigue to an already sensational story. Media reports highlighted the murder, the son's arrest, and now the involvement of federal agents. But what the public didn't yet know, what even neighbors could barely comprehend, was that the estate was a vault of hidden truths. The FBI had not only been called to investigate a murder, they had been called to unravel a complex web of secrecy, concealment, and possibly historical significance that no one had anticipated. And just when it seemed that the FBI had seen it all, they discovered something that would make even the most experienced agent pause. An object, partially buried beneath a concrete slab near the garage, hinted at a connection to a long-forgotten case. Its presence raised immediate questions. How did it get there? Who placed it? And was it tied to the Reiner family, or to someone else entirely? The implications were staggering. This discovery marked a turning point. The investigation was no longer just about the murders. It was about uncovering hidden truths, understanding motives, and tracing connections that spanned years, perhaps even decades. Each artifact, each carefully concealed item, carried with it a story waiting to be told, and the FBI was determined to tell it. The complexity of the investigation only heightened the drama. Every object uncovered brought new possibilities, connections to missing persons, links to other criminal investigations, or insights into the psychology of those who had lived at the estate. The deeper the FBI dug, the more they realized that the Reiner mansion was not just a location. It was a repository of human behavior, secrecy, and perhaps even guilt. Beneath the manicured lawns of the Reiner estate, the ground held secrets. At first glance, the gardens were immaculate, the flower beds vibrant, the walkways pristine. But for the FBI, trained to look beyond appearances, subtle anomalies hinted at something far more disturbing. Slight depressions in the soil, inconsistencies in concrete slabs, faintly uneven patches of grass. Each anomaly told a story, a silent whisper that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide something below. When investigators first began digging, the reality became undeniable. There were hidden underground items, not random debris or forgotten household objects, but carefully placed items, preserved as if someone expected them to remain undiscovered for years, perhaps decades. Each object was a message left behind, a secret preserved in earth and stone. The sheer intentionality behind the concealment was immediately apparent. Whoever had buried these items understood permanence, secrecy, and perhaps even legacy. The first items recovered were personal objects. Letters, photographs, trinkets. Some were tied directly to the Reiner family, others were not. Photographs of people whose faces no one could recognize. Letters with cryptic messages or initials. Journals partially decayed, but still legible. Each item raised more questions than answers. Why were they buried here? Were they connected to the family, to someone outside the household, or to events long forgotten? The FBI noted patterns in the placement. Items were grouped carefully, some wrapped in materials designed to preserve them, others stored in small wooden boxes reinforced to withstand moisture. It was clear that this was not haphazard. Whoever buried them had thought about longevity and protection. Every detail, from the depth of burial to the positioning of each artifact, suggested deliberate design. This wasn't just hiding, it was safeguarding. But safeguarding what? And from whom? Some objects immediately raised chilling possibilities. A small, leather-bound notebook contained notes referencing events that investigators believed could relate to unsolved crimes or missing persons. Certain photographs, when examined closely, showed locations or people that didn't appear in any public record. Even mundane-looking trinkets, a piece of jewelry, a carved figurine, seemed intentionally preserved. Each object was a clue, but what puzzle did they fit into? The FBI began to hypothesize. Could the items be connected to the murders? Perhaps someone feared that secrets would come to light, and violence was used to prevent exposure. Or were the murders unrelated, and the buried items part of a separate, older mystery? The duality of the situation created tension and intrigue. The investigators had to consider every angle, knowing that the answers could redefine the case. As they continued to unearth items, the investigators found evidence that the buried objects spanned decades. Some items appeared aged and weathered, consistent with being hidden for 20, 30, or even 40 years. Others were more recent, suggesting that this was not a single act of concealment, but an ongoing practice. The estate was, in effect, a layered archive of secrets. Each layer revealed a different era, a different narrative, a different set of questions. The types of items varied as well. Some were domestic, dishes, toys, or clothing that could be linked to the family. Others were enigmatic, artifacts that didn't fit the context of a modern Brentwood home. A small carved statue of uncertain origin. A journal with handwriting in a language no one immediately recognized. An envelope containing documents with dates and names that seemed to correspond to unresolved cases. The diversity of the items deepened the mystery. And then there were the items that seemed to carry intentional messages. A photograph, partially damaged but still legible, had markings that suggested code or symbolism. A folded piece of paper bore a series of numbers and letters that did not match conventional addresses or dates. Investigators speculated that these might represent locations, times, or perhaps people. The possibility that someone had created a complex system of concealed information beneath the estate was both thrilling and terrifying. As the FBI expanded the search, they realized that the buried items were not limited to a single location. Trenches, small chambers, and hidden compartments revealed multiple caches. Some were shallow, just beneath the surface. Others required careful excavation, suggesting that whoever buried them wanted them deeply hidden, perhaps to prevent discovery even if someone suspected their existence. The effort required to conceal these items speaks to the importance someone placed on them. Every discovery prompted new lines of questioning. Were the items connected to the Reiners' personal history, or were they linked to external events, unresolved crimes, old investigations, or missing persons? Did the buried objects reveal a pattern, a secret life, or hidden dealings? The FBI quickly understood that solving the murder without understanding the hidden items would be incomplete. These objects were not just evidence. They were potentially keys to motive, context, and history. The emotional weight of the discoveries was significant. For the FBI agents, uncovering these hidden items was not merely a procedural task. Each item carried the presence of human intention. Someone had decided, years or decades earlier, that these objects mattered enough to bury. The act of concealment suggested urgency, secrecy, and perhaps fear. And now, investigators were tasked with interpreting not just the objects themselves, but the mindset that led to their concealment. The complexity of the situation became more apparent as forensic analysis began. Some items had been treated with chemicals to preserve them. Others were wrapped in layers of cloth, plastic, or waxed paper. Dirt had been tamped down carefully to avoid detection. The attention to detail was meticulous. Whoever had buried these items had foreseen the possibility of discovery and had taken measures to protect the contents. This was premeditated, calculated, and deliberate. Even more astonishing was the evidence of a possible connection to unresolved cases. Investigators found items that appeared to be linked to missing persons reports from decades prior. Certain photographs and documents suggested associations that no one had previously considered. If the connections held up under further scrutiny, the Reiner estate might not just be the scene of a horrific murder, it could be a linchpin in solving older, unsolved mysteries. The FBI's methodology was exacting. Ground-penetrating radar, careful excavation, and forensic cataloging ensured that nothing was missed. Each item was photographed, logged, and analyzed. The team treated the site with the reverence of an archaeological dig, understanding that these objects were more than artifacts. They were pieces of human history, behavior, and possibly criminal activity. Publicly, the discoveries remained shrouded in secrecy. The media reported on the murder, the arrest, and the FBI's involvement, but details of the buried items were not immediately released. The agency was careful to avoid compromising investigations or creating false narratives. Yet even the hint that hidden items existed fueled speculation, fascination, and fear. Could the Reiner estate have been a vault of secrets no one suspected? The public imagination ran wild with possibilities. The investigators also began considering psychological implications. The act of burying items beneath one's home is symbolic. It reflects a desire to control, protect, and sometimes manipulate knowledge. It suggests secrecy and foresight, as well as a belief that certain truths must remain hidden. In the context of the Reiner estate, this raised profound questions about the family, their history, and the circumstances surrounding the murders. Every excavation deepened the mystery. Some items seemed mundane but had subtle signs of significance. Initials carved into the back of a frame, an old date written on a piece of paper, a photograph partially hidden behind another object. Others were overtly unusual. An artifact with foreign markings, a small box containing carefully folded documents, or a symbolic trinket that suggested ritual or personal meaning. Each discovery posed questions that investigators could not immediately answer. And yet, for all the intrigue, the presence of these hidden items also raised a chilling possibility. If someone had gone to such lengths to conceal these objects, could the murders themselves have been connected? Were they intended to prevent further discovery, to silence witnesses, or to protect secrets buried beneath the estate? The connections were not yet clear, but the potential for them to be significant was undeniable. As the day turned to night, the FBI continued to excavate, catalog, and analyze. They knew that each item was part of a larger narrative, a story that had been carefully hidden for years. The estate was no longer just a crime scene. It was a labyrinth of secrets, waiting for the truth to be revealed. And the more they uncovered, the more they realized that what lay beneath the surface could change everything about how the murders were understood. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. An object, partially buried beneath a concrete slab near the estate's rear garage, hinted at connections that no one had anticipated to unresolved cases, missing persons, and possibly even motivations for the murders themselves. It was a find that would alter the course of the investigation, and it was only the beginning. As the FBI continued uncovering hidden items beneath the Reiner estate, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Some of the objects appeared to have connections far beyond the family, links to unsolved cases, missing persons, and mysteries that had haunted investigators for decades. Suddenly, the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner weren't just a tragic family crime. They were a potential key to unraveling a much larger and more complex story. The first hints came from a collection of photographs found in a buried metal box. At first, they seemed innocuous. Images of people in various settings, some formal, some casual. But careful examination revealed something extraordinary. Certain faces matched descriptions from missing persons reports filed years ago. Locations captured in the photographs appeared to correspond with towns and neighborhoods tied to unresolved cases. There was a sense that someone had deliberately preserved these memories, or evidence, beneath the Reiner estate, perhaps to ensure they would remain hidden until the right time. The FBI's forensic analysts compared the photographs to archived police reports. Names, dates, and circumstances lined up in ways that seemed impossible. Could the Reiner estate have been a secret repository for evidence related to other cases? Were these items intended as a record, a confession, or perhaps a warning? The deeper the investigators looked, the more connections surfaced, each one raising more questions than it answered. Among the buried objects, the agents found journals with cryptic entries. Some were personal reflections, while others hinted at specific incidents. Disappearances, conflicts, and events that had never been publicly reported. One journal entry referenced a young woman who had vanished without a trace, her disappearance officially classified as a cold case. The details were vague but unmistakable: dates, locations, and initials that matched missing person reports from the early 1990s. The discovery sent a shockwave through the investigative team. Could these buried items be connected to unsolved cases that had long frustrated law enforcement? If so, the Reiner estate was no longer merely a crime scene. It was a potential vault of historical evidence, containing keys to mysteries that had remained unsolved for decades. Every object, no matter how mundane it seemed, now held potential significance. The agents also uncovered correspondence between individuals whose identities remained mysterious. Letters, envelopes, and notes bore markings suggesting secret communication. Some referenced events that seemed unrelated to the family, yet were tied to locations in other cities or states. Investigators began to consider the possibility that the Reiner family, or someone closely associated with them, may have played a role in concealing or safeguarding these materials. But why? And to what end? Interviews with neighbors and acquaintances painted an incomplete picture. Some described the Reiners as private, almost reclusive, with interests that were eclectic and sometimes puzzling. Others noted that the family maintained an extensive personal archive, photographs, letters, and objects collected over decades. Yet no one had anticipated the extent to which items could have been buried beneath the estate, hidden from sight with deliberate care. The FBI's discovery of these hidden connections prompted the involvement of cold case specialists. These experts reviewed decades-old files, comparing information from missing persons reports and unsolved investigations to the objects unearthed at the Reiner estate. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. One particularly chilling find was a small wooden box containing documents linked to a case involving a person who had disappeared in the late 1980s. The box included personal belongings, a watch, a necklace, and a series of handwritten notes. The notes suggested an awareness of events that had never been made public. For investigators, the implication was clear. Someone had been deliberately preserving these materials, possibly for decades, beneath the Reiner estate. The psychological dimension of this discovery was significant. To bury items connected to unresolved cases suggests not only secrecy, but a profound awareness of the consequences if they were discovered. The individual responsible understood the gravity of their actions, and their foresight implied both intelligence and calculation. Investigators began to speculate about motives. Were these items buried as a form of protection, confession, or control? And how did the Reiner family fit into this narrative? As the team continued excavating, they uncovered more documents, each reinforcing the possibility that the estate held long-hidden truths. Some papers contained dates and locations matching police files. Others included cryptic annotations, initials, symbols, and shorthand that suggested deliberate coding. The complexity of the arrangement was staggering. Whoever had buried these items had not acted impulsively, but with careful thought, precision, and purpose. The implications for the murder investigation were profound. Could the presence of these objects have motivated the crime? Was someone attempting to prevent exposure, perhaps through violence? Or were the murders a separate event, intersecting with a larger hidden history by coincidence? The FBI had to consider every possibility. Every connection, every artifact, added a layer of complexity that made solving the murders more challenging and far more intriguing. Investigators also considered historical context. Some of the items predated Rob and Michelle Reiner's residence in the mansion, suggesting that the estate had been a site of concealment for many years, possibly decades. This raised additional questions. Who had initiated the practice of burying items, and why? Had the Reiners continued it, or had they simply inherited the legacy of secrecy? The historical breadth of the discoveries suggested a multi-generational pattern of concealment. Among the most perplexing objects were personal items that appeared to belong to individuals whose whereabouts were unknown. Some were linked to cold cases involving young adults who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Others were related to incidents that had never reached public attention. The presence of these items beneath the Reiner estate suggested a deliberate effort to shield them from discovery, raising troubling questions about complicity, knowledge, and intent. The FBI conducted forensic testing on each object, seeking fingerprints, DNA, and other clues that might indicate who had handled them. The results were limited but significant. Some items bore traces of individuals connected to the Reiner family, while others carried no immediately identifiable markers. This suggested multiple actors over time, a network of individuals engaged in secrecy. The estate was not just a hiding place. It was a carefully maintained archive of concealed histories. Experts in cold cases emphasize the rarity of such a discovery. Few homes contain physical evidence that spans multiple unresolved investigations. The Reiner estate was not just unusual, it was exceptional. Investigators recognized that this could potentially provide breakthroughs in cases long considered unsolvable. But with this promise came profound danger. Uncovering decades-old secrets could expose hidden crimes, implicate innocent or guilty parties, and dramatically reshape the narrative of the Reiner family itself. The deeper the FBI dug, the more connections surfaced. Handwriting analysis suggested that certain notes matched individuals whose names appeared in unrelated investigations. Some documents referenced locations and events tied to missing persons across several states. Even mundane objects, a piece of jewelry, a folded letter, or a photograph, could be significant, providing context or evidence that linked multiple cases together. Each discovery required meticulous cataloging and interpretation. The emotional weight for the investigators was immense. They were not just processing objects. They were processing human stories. Lives interrupted, mysteries unresolved, and secrets deliberately hidden. Every artifact represented a choice, a decision by someone to control information, protect it, or conceal it for reasons investigators could only speculate about. The act of burying these items was both a physical and psychological statement. Some truths are too dangerous or painful to be left exposed. The possibility that the hidden objects were connected to the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner became increasingly plausible. If these items contained secrets or information someone wanted suppressed, it could explain motives beyond family dynamics or domestic disputes. The FBI had to expand their lens. The murder investigation might intersect with decades-old unresolved cases, creating a web of cause, effect, and concealment that no one had anticipated. By the end of the day, the FBI had established several critical points. The Reiner estate contained deliberately buried items spanning decades. Many of these objects were linked to unsolved cases or missing persons. The concealment was deliberate, careful, and possibly multi-generational, and the items could provide critical insight into the motives behind the murders. The implications were staggering, and the investigation had only just begun. And then, just as investigators prepared to close the initial excavation for the night, they uncovered an object that defied immediate explanation. A sealed metal container, buried deep, containing items that appeared to link directly to a cold case involving a missing person with connections to Los Angeles neighborhoods near the Reiner estate. This was not just a coincidence. The presence of this object suggested that the estate held truths that could solve mysteries no one had dared to connect. Mysteries that might finally see resolution because of what had been buried all along. The deeper the FBI dug beneath the Reiner estate, the stranger the discoveries became. What started as a meticulous excavation of buried letters, photographs, and journals soon revealed artifacts that seemed almost otherworldly in their peculiarity. These were not ordinary objects one would expect to find hidden beneath a suburban mansion. They were unusual, enigmatic, and carried an aura of mystery that both fascinated and unsettled the investigators. The first artifact to raise eyebrows was a small carved figurine, roughly 6 inches tall, buried in a shallow chamber near the estate's rear gardens. Its design was unlike anything cataloged in local art or cultural archives. The carving depicted a figure that appeared both human and symbolic, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. The craftsmanship suggested it was old, possibly decades, or even a century in age. Yet how and why it ended up buried beneath the Reiner estate was a mystery. FBI agents were quick to catalog and analyze the object. Chemical testing revealed traces of a substance that could preserve wood for decades, further confirming its age. But there were no identifiable markings to trace its origin, no inscriptions, and no obvious cultural references. The figurine seemed deliberately chosen and deliberately hidden. Why? Who would go to such lengths to bury an artifact of uncertain significance in a suburban backyard? Then there was a small metal box, no larger than a shoebox, unearthed beneath the garage's concrete floor. Inside were dozens of items that defied immediate classification. Unusual coins, fragments of leather-bound books, and what appeared to be small ceremonial objects. Some bore markings resembling ancient symbols, while others had cryptic numbers and letters etched into their surfaces. Each object prompted new questions. Were these personal belongings, ritualistic items, or something entirely different? And what connection did they have to the Reiner family, if any? Investigators also uncovered jewelry of unusual design. Rings, pendants, and bracelets that didn't match contemporary fashion or typical family heirlooms. Some appeared to have been crafted decades earlier, with intricate etchings that might represent dates, initials, or coded messages. Forensic analysis revealed fingerprints and traces of substances not consistent with normal household use. The patterns of wear suggested intentional use, perhaps as symbols or tokens. Could they have belonged to someone outside the family? Could they hint at relationships, alliances, or knowledge that no one expected? Perhaps the most perplexing discovery was a small set of documents, carefully sealed in wax and hidden beneath a floorboard in the mansion study. The writing was dense, meticulous, and sometimes cryptic. Some entries contained mathematical formulas, others abstract symbols, and a few detailed diagrams of locations that investigators could not immediately identify. Could these have been maps, encoded messages, or clues to something hidden elsewhere? The very presence of these documents suggested foresight, knowledge, and a deliberate effort to control information. Agents also noted a series of objects that appeared to be intentionally placed together. A set of small, polished stones, each inscribed with an unfamiliar symbol, a folded piece of fabric containing an unknown pattern, and a miniature chest filled with trinkets, some metallic, some organic. The arrangement suggested intent. Whoever had hidden these items had considered their placement carefully, preserving meaning, context, and accessibility. These were not randomly buried objects. They were curated, stored, and protected. As the FBI continued to examine these artifacts, questions multiplied. Who had collected these items? Were they part of the Reiner family's private life, or did they belong to someone entirely separate, whose connection to the estate was hidden from public view? Could these objects have symbolic or ritualistic significance? And most urgently, did any of these artifacts have a connection to the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner? Experts in historical artifacts and symbolism were brought in to provide insight. They analyzed the carvings, coins, and symbols, attempting to place them within cultural, historical, and geographical contexts. While some items could be traced to certain regions or time periods, many defied easy categorization. Some seemed almost intentionally obscure, designed to conceal meaning from casual observers. The complexity of the collection suggested not just secrecy, but sophistication, forethought, and intelligence. The emotional impact on the investigators was also notable. Each discovery carried a sense of awe and unease. These artifacts were tangible connections to unknown histories, human behaviors, and possible criminal acts. They suggested that the Reiner estate had been used for purposes that went far beyond ordinary domestic life. For the FBI, this was a reminder that the physical world, even a suburban mansion, could conceal narratives more complex than the most intricate novels. As the investigation progressed, the pattern became clear. The unusual artifacts were part of a network of hidden items, spanning multiple locations across the property. Chambers beneath the gardens, small boxes hidden in the garage, and compartments under floorboards all contained objects with similar characteristics, curated, preserved, and deliberately concealed. Each discovery added weight to the theory that the estate had been used to store items that someone never wanted discovered, possibly for years or even decades. The presence of these artifacts also raised questions about the Reiner family's awareness. Had Rob and Michelle known about all of these hidden items? Were they complicit in their concealment, guardians of secrets inherited from previous generations, or completely unaware of the full extent of what lay beneath their home? And if they were aware, could this knowledge have played a role in the tragic events that unfolded? The investigators also examined the context in which these artifacts were buried. Many were placed beneath locations that were frequently used or highly visible, under a frequently walked path, near the garage where vehicles came and went, or in chambers beneath the living room. This suggested not a desire for permanent secrecy, but rather selective concealment, an intent to hide the items from casual discovery while keeping them accessible to someone who knew exactly where to look. Some artifacts appeared to carry messages intended for future discovery. One small wooden box contained items arranged in a sequence that might represent a timeline or a coded instruction. Investigators speculated that these could be clues left for someone who would eventually uncover them. If so, the person responsible had anticipated that their secrets might one day surface. A chilling realization that added gravity to the entire investigation. The FBI's work was painstaking, requiring careful excavation, cataloging, and analysis. Every object had to be preserved, documented, and interpreted. Forensic analysis included fingerprinting, chemical testing, and DNA sampling. Historical experts analyzed symbols, patterns, and materials. Psychological profiling attempted to understand the mindset of the person who had buried these items. The effort was immense, but necessary, because these artifacts could provide insight not only into the family's past, but also into the motives behind the murders. As night fell over the estate, the magnitude of the discoveries weighed heavily on the agents. The Reiner mansion, once seen as a symbol of affluence and stability, had revealed itself to be a labyrinth of hidden meanings, deliberate concealment, and carefully curated mysteries. The unusual artifacts were not mere curiosities. They were clues, evidence, and possibly keys to understanding long-buried truths. Yet, even with these revelations, the investigation had only begun to scratch the surface. The artifacts posed more questions than they answered. Who collected them? Why were they hidden? How did they connect to the murders, the Reiner family, or unresolved cases from decades past? And perhaps most unnervingly, what other secrets still lay buried, waiting to be uncovered? As the FBI's excavation progressed, it became clear that the buried artifacts were not scattered haphazardly across the Reiner estate. Instead, they seemed to be concentrated in certain areas, almost as if the property contained a secret location specifically designed to store items meant never to be discovered. What initially appeared to be random concealment now suggested a deliberate spatial logic, a hidden network of storage crafted with care and intent. The first indications of this came from subtle anomalies detected in the landscaping. Slight depressions, differences in soil density, and the unusual placement of ornamental rocks and shrubs suggested that someone had modified the terrain to hide entrances or chambers. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of hidden cavities beneath multiple points on the property. Some were shallow, others deeper, but all seemed designed with precision, built to protect and conceal the contents within. Agents began focusing on a section of the estate behind the main garden, an area that had previously been considered decorative and unremarkable. Here, beneath a carefully maintained flower bed, they discovered a small but robust chamber. Constructed with reinforced concrete and lined to prevent moisture infiltration, it appeared to be built to last decades. Inside were several wooden boxes containing the artifacts already discussed: photographs, journals, letters, and unusual objects. The design of the chamber indicated deliberate planning. This was not a temporary hiding place, but a permanent storage location intended to withstand time and scrutiny. For the FBI, this discovery raised immediate questions. Who had constructed the chamber? Was it Rob or Michelle, or someone else entirely? Had the chamber been used over decades, accumulating objects hidden for reasons now lost to history? And, most crucially, did the existence of such a hidden location connect directly to the motive behind the murders? The implications were both profound and unsettling. Further examination revealed more chambers, some hidden beneath concrete walkways, others beneath the garage and patio areas. Each was carefully concealed, often beneath areas that would be frequently traversed, yet cleverly disguised to avoid detection. Some entrances were hidden under removable slabs, others under layers of soil and decorative stone. Whoever had created these secret spaces understood both architecture and human psychology, ensuring the chambers would be invisible to anyone who did not know precisely where to look. Inside these chambers, items were arranged with clear intent. Artifacts were grouped by type, date, or presumed significance. Documents were folded or rolled to preserve their condition. Photographs were carefully stacked, and objects with unknown origin were separated from personal items. The FBI noted the care with which each item had been preserved, interpreting it as evidence of foresight, organization, and perhaps even ritual. This was more than concealment, it was curation. The chambers themselves varied in size and complexity. Some were small enough to hold only a few boxes, while others were large enough to store dozens of objects. Some included compartments within compartments, a design that suggested layered access. Certain items were meant for immediate retrieval, while others were intended to remain hidden indefinitely. The sophistication of these hidden storage areas indicated not only intelligence, but also a commitment to secrecy that could span generations. Investigators began to speculate about the purpose of these secret locations. Were they meant to protect evidence from discovery? To preserve memories, artifacts, or heirlooms? Or were they repositories of information related to unresolved cases, missing persons, or other events that required concealment? The presence of coded documents, cryptic photographs, and unusual artifacts suggested that these chambers were more than simple storage. They were a vault of hidden knowledge. Forensic analysis of the chambers revealed further details that heightened the mystery. Some contained traces of materials intended to prevent decay, chemicals to preserve paper and fabric, protective linings for metal and wood, and other preservation methods not commonly used outside of professional archival contexts. This suggested that whoever had buried these items had expertise, or at least knowledge in preservation techniques. They were not haphazardly hiding objects. They were safeguarding them with precision. The psychological implications of the secret chambers were striking. The act of creating a hidden space beneath one's home implies a need for control, secrecy, and dominance over information. It reflects an understanding that certain truths, artifacts, or memories must be hidden, either for protection, manipulation, or personal reasons. In the context of the Reiner estate, this suggested